I live in the Carolinas, and there are plenty of swamplands around here. You can't avoid them, but if you grew up around here, you know the rules, and don't go anywhere near them without being covered in bug spray. And watch out for snakes and alligators. But what if I told you I saw something down there once, which made me think I'd take 100 mosey bites instead? Let me tell you about it. You see, I was driving back from work one night when I noticed the car started pulling, and I realized I had a flat. I pulled over and checked. Sure enough, one of the front wheels was flapping. I work in a bar, and sometimes the patrons get a little feisty. Must have been a fight outside, and some glass didn't get picked up, and of course I had to drive over it. Now, I know you're always meant to carry a spare. It was one of around 1 million things I had on my to-do list, which hadn't yet gotten done. So now, I'm stuck on the side of the road. Of course near the swamps, because I couldn't have broken down in town with all the streetlights and people around. So I'm trying to decide whether to call AAA or a buddy to come help out. And that's right when I hear this strange noise. Of course, being near swampland in the evening, there are all sorts of noises. Creatures that live in there go about their business. But this sounded different. At first, I thought maybe somebody was just passing by. That someone had seen my car and pulled over further down the road, which I'd somehow missed, and now they were coming to help. Because that was what it sounded like. Footsteps. Wet footsteps. Like maybe somebody had been wading through water. I looked down the street both ways, but surprisingly, I couldn't see whoever was making the noise. But that was because I was obviously looking at the road. When I turned back toward the swamp, I saw exactly who, or more accurately what, was making the noise. It looked like a lizard, but not a regular lizard. That would have been too normal. But never fear, because this lizard was humanoid-like. I didn't know that at the time. I just stood there, with my mouth hanging open, doing all the usual things like pinching myself, rubbing my eyes to see if I was truly dreaming. I was unfortunately very much awake, staring at what I can only say is this lizard man, or what I thought of him until I got home and tried to do some research. The best way for me to describe him is that he kind of looked a bit like an alligator, with 2 human-like legs, only with a much thinner body and long legs. It's actually quite hard for me to accurately describe. I guess because my mind wants desperately to try and make sense of what my eyes were seeing. Yeah, he looked really tall, easily like a regular person, but was very thick and scaly, really powerful looking arms and legs. His head was just like an actual lizard or alligator. Long jaws with large teeth and a snout, eyes that bugged out on the sides of his face. He was just slowly wading through the swamp water, heading right for me in my direction. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hazard that guess that they don't teach shop or mechanics to lizard people, so I can only think that this thing was going to hurt me. So I grabbed my phone and keys, and I ran, as far away from the swamp and my car as possible, until I got to the safety of some houses and streetlights about a mile or so down the road. Then, I called one of my friends to come pick me up. Now, he is a lot braver, or more stupid. Then, he drives back with a huge pickup truck. When I told him what I'd seen, he immediately wanted to go back and check it out. The shotgun he had in the back made me feel braver, but still, there was the risk. We headed back to my car, which was still exactly where I'd left it. so I guess this lizard dude wasn't into stealing my vehicle. My friend Nate jumps out of the pickup, shotgun in hand, and starts shouting and hollering. But of course we don't see anything. I have no idea exactly what that thing was or what it intended to do. All I knew was I didn't want to hang about and find out. But as I said, once I was feeling a bit braver, I looked, and not only did I find your channel, I found a lot of similar disturbing sightings. So it seems lizard men or alligator men gets around, and apparently, judging from your other encounters, there's a whole family of them living around here in the swamps up in southeastern America. There are some things your mom tells you that you should really listen to. Of course, when we are kids, we always think that we know best. But listen, there's often a reason why they tell you not to do certain things, but we usually end up finding them out the hard way. For example, my mother told us kids not to play in the stream at the bottom of the field because it was dirty and boggy, and you never know what you might find or catch in there. It was like telling us kids not to eat sweets because they'd rot your teeth out. Like a moth to a flame, we were drawn to the stream even more after being warned. So, one day, after a particularly rainy night, my little brother and I headed straight to the stream, knowing it would be overflowing, thus even more enticing. We played with sticks, trying to find newts, made newspaper boats, and did all of the things that any child would do near a stream. We pulled up our joggers and stomped in the muddy water, and that was when we saw the ripples. Ripples meant air, which meant something was living in there rather than just the water and flies we had seen so far. This made us excited. Now, I have no idea what to be expected in the muddy, boggy stream, but what came out of the water would blow our tiny 8 to 10-year-old minds. It, or he, or they, must have been laying low on the ground under the stream, as when it stood up and rose from the water, there was no way he could have possibly been covered by that level of water otherwise. It was around our height, so about 4 feet or so, and looked like something straight out of a comic book. Covered in greenish scales, weird fins and gills. He kind of had a squat body and long bowed legs, and thin arms and webbed hands and feet. I'm not trying to be mean. It was very amphibious looking, and it was kind of funny, but also frightening. Rising out of the stream was this creature, only he wasn't so little to us at the time, since he was around our size. My brother and I were caught between fear and excitement. Our mouths were wide open. It's not exactly what you would expect to see. I'd like to say that we weren't scared, but we were both terrified. We did not expect to see anything like that. He sort of just looked at us, unamused, then turned around and jolted off. We ran all the way home and didn't stop until we were back inside the kitchen with my mom, who just looked at us as if to say, "See, I told you not to go into the stream." It's like deep down she knew we shouldn't have been there, and that maybe there was more dangerous things than what we could have thought. Of course now, this was so many years ago, but as an adult, it's fun to think back and realize that there are animals that exist that go beyond the realm of our imagination. I don't believe in Bigfoot, but I certainly do believe in undiscovered species of animals. As far as an explanation for what me and my brother saw, well, I have no idea what animal that was. People have asked me before if you ever really get used to living in gator country. I don't exactly know how to answer them. It's like asking if you ever get used to living around a hornet's nest. Sure, the sights and sounds will grow on you, but if you get stung, you get stung, and it doesn't hurt any less if you've seen them once a week or once an hour. So it is with gators. You get eaten, you die, no matter how used you are to seeing them. I've been living in gator country for my 45 years, and I haven't lost any arms or legs yet. I do think I have lost some nerves with some close encounters I've had, and one in particular stands out, since I'm not sure if I can really blame the gators for it. I had just enough southern comfort to make me braver than I should have been, and when I get brave, I like to go exploring. I want to take the canoe, the lantern if I need it, and go looking around. I know what a gator looks like, especially when it's trying to pretend to be a drifting log, and no amount of drink can blind me to it. It's a sight that I know by heart. But I came across something entirely new, really. It's a miracle that it did not cost me my life, since I went in to greet death, eyes wide open. So I'm out there exploring, driven by curiosity, fanned by the flame of a good buzz. The passages I could row down were getting narrower and narrower, and the reeds were growing closer together. I came to a clearing where I swear I saw what looked like tall, green pineapples growing up out of the water. They had the same overall shape and texture, except that they had something like scales on the outside, and the whole lot of things would twitch and bounce in a while. There was also the occasional burp sound, indicating the expulsion of either air or fluids. If I had been smart or sober, I would have hightailed it back home, but I wasn't sober. Like a big kid that had just discovered big pine cones, I had to see what sort of secrets those big scaly green things held. My knife was barely any good on them. I could get the blade under a scale and peel it off without great effort, but that was it. The things were well armored. I was able to comprehend well enough that it was some sort of egg or embryo, but I didn't reflect long enough on what sort of thing made them, and whether said thing would be nearby to protect the brood. At first, I thought it was a gator rearing up to attack me. Then I thought the whiskey might have been spiked with something stronger than just alcohol, because I saw what could have passed as a gator walking on its two back legs, keeping its balance just fine and holding its body upright with the grace of a cobra. The head, though, was shorter than your usual gators, and the eyes were larger. The mouth also hung open a bit, and all the teeth you'd ever expect to see were there. But there was an alertness, an intelligence in those eyes that I'd never seen in any gator's eyes. It must have been Mama, and she was not thrilled to see me. I took out my dad's revolver, which was empty, and aimed it at my attacker. And she, or it, seemed to understand immediately, freezing in place. I abandoned my phone that I had just dropped in the water, and I ran. Last thing I remember was somebody calling my name from far away. After that, I blacked out. Apparently, my wife had come back looking for me when I didn't show up at nightfall. They had pretty much been on my heels when I was busy, tussling with my scaly little friend. I can't think of any other explanations as to why I'm still here. Whatever that thing was that lived in the swamp surely would have eaten me alive if it had just been me and her. I've never seen an alligator like that before, nor do I know exactly what it was. I feel weird for even using the term alligator. While it resembled an alligator, a lot of its defining features were very human-like. So was it an alligator man, dare I say? I don't know. And its eggs. I found its eggs, or embryos. Either way, I'm very disturbed, and hopefully this information will do better to you than it will to me. I was a part of a research expedition in the Amazon rainforest. We were looking for some indications that some plants could cure modern diseases. It's another big secret that the worldwide medical system needs all the help it can get. The locals had directed us to an especially dense grove of trees that produced these small, strange yellow fruits. And no, not lemons. When taken back for research, it was found that early-stage cancer cells dried up immediately by substances and proteins found within this particular fruit. Just to say, my superiors were eager to get their hands, and on only these fruits, but also on seeds of this particular tree, so they could look into propagating them in a controlled environment as soon as possible. The natives had warned that not too much of the fruit should leave the grove at any given time. Otherwise, the forest would be angry. We thought that was a joke. Well, I was hoping that 3 small crates would not be considered greedy by the forest. I was nailing the last lid on the crate when we all heard a blood-chilling howl. Staring in between the trees were sets of large compound eyes that shifted colors, primarily between green and yellow. They were set in faces that were mostly olive green, with some molted gray and brown. At first, I made them out to be people that were covered in a great deal of war paint. Makes sense. Maybe we had disturbed the territory of some uncontacted Amazonian tribe. But then I saw that they weren't people at all. I saw teeth, like shark teeth, and lots of thick scales, claws that resembled meat hooks, faces that ranged from every structure resembling to a Komodo dragon to even modern crocodiles. I don't think I've ever ran so fast in my life. My veins were on fire, and my heart felt like it would have stopped at any minute. After a very long time, I looked behind me to see that the creatures were not pursuing me. I had tried to find my way back to that grove, and I never could. The expedition was considered a large-scale failure, and before we could leave the country, we were greeted by Brazilian military who confiscated our 3 crates and took the expedition leader and nearly detained him before giving him a good talking. We were told and demanded to leave the country as soon as we could and to never return. I'm not exactly sure why it was necessary for the Brazilian military to get involved, or why they felt it was necessary to confiscate the fruit and threaten us and demand we leave. Something is going on. I believe they knew something was up with that grove, and the warnings we had received prior about that same grove were probably in hopes that we would never venture to there. Who knows what we were not supposed to see that we had seen. I had taken a long fishing trip to a more isolated region of Alaska. Granted, every part of Alaska is considered isolated. A lot of places you can only reach by airplane. Where I was at was isolated, even by the standards of Alaskan natives. For miles in any direction, it was just me, and waters, and tall grasses, and pines, and blue skies. At least, that's what I thought. I was spending the night staring at the moon. There's something about it that's hypnotic and mesmerizing. I would then stare at the water. I would then see disturbances in the water. At the time, I just attributed this to the fish, which made me look forward to the catches during the day. But there were some things about the disturbance in the water that I could not account for. Protrusions above the water that didn't belong to any fish that I knew of. And believe me, if anyone knew fish, it was me. In the middle of one night, I woke up by virtue of some deep down instinct. I was in trouble, but I couldn't have told you why. I consciously stepped out of my tent and looked around. I didn't see any wolves or coyotes or bears, but when I looked towards the water, I saw some hunchback shape with a long tail. I could make out the silhouette of long claws, a spiked dorsal plate that ran up and down the back, all the way to the tip of the tail. At first, I gasped, thinking this was a real-life dinosaur that was probably hunting at night, and would make sense since they were nocturnal. The movement of the water seemed very strange. That's when I realized that I was looking at more than one of the same creature. Perhaps dozens. They were pacing at the edge of the water. Each time I got something like a clear glimpse of their heads, they were turned toward me. I had a sinking sensation in my stomach as I was aware of the vast empty miles of wilderness that surrounded me. I could run for hours and not even see a single soul. I was alone out there with these things that were very much aware of me. Safe to say, I didn't sleep much the rest of that trip. A few of those nights I didn't sleep at all, and the times that I did sleep, it was out of sheer exhaustion. I don't know why those dinosaur creatures never bothered to engage me. Maybe they were just guarding something, and they were making sure that this human being wasn't going any further. Either way, I still see those shapes stalking me in my sleep, circling me like sharks. But that's probably my own fear and trauma of the experience. To this day, I honestly believe I saw real-life dinosaurs. I was driving home one afternoon through some thick farmland, admiring the open fields, and thinking to myself how lucky I was to be able to have a steady job in the town and then come home to my house out in the countryside. It was a glorious springtime day when the sun was just about still shining and the trees were starting to look green and healthy again. I was just enjoying looking around and taking in the sights when I saw something run out in front of me onto the road. I never travel too fast for this very reason on the windy roads, as you never know what might spring out of the hedges, and I have had a near miss with a deer before, in which I'm still not sure of which was more startled. This thing was far enough in front of me for me to be able to apply the brakes carefully and ease my already low speed without causing any issues. There were no other cars about anyway. This also gave me the chance to be able to see what type of creature this particular jaywalker was. It was some sort of lizard reptile. That much I do know. And if I hadn't seen it with my own two eyes, I never would have even believed it was there. That would be because of the greenish scales covering its body. Where something like that had come from or was heading off to, I have no idea. There is water around here, but not exactly huge lakes or swamps. Still, it was there, crossing the road. A reptile of which I had never seen the like before. You see, unless most of its kin, it wasn't slithering across the road, or scampering on four little feet like a gecko. No, this creature was strolling across the road on 2 feet. Upright, like a person. It appeared to have tiny legs and webbed feet, a long scaly body, and even tiny arms. It almost looked like a lizard, or an alligator had just decided that 2 feet would be the way to go. Its body looked all wrong. Not that there was anything even remotely normal about what I was seeing. It was more like a human torso, but covered in green scales with reptilian limbs. And then was the head. Have you ever seen the creature from the Black Lagoon? That odd-shaped head, with like flat gills on the side. Well, that was what it was on top of this messed up long human lizard. It wasn't that tall either, maybe 3 feet at most. Once it clocked the car, it turned and stared at me for a moment. Bug-wide eyes, never blinking. Then it sped off faster than I never would have thought. I sat there, my car idling, wondering what on earth I had just seen. It didn't appear threatening, and I wasn't exactly scared. More in awe and disbelief. After a few moments, when it seemed I wouldn't be making a return journey, I simply carried on my way home. But I'll never exactly forget what I saw that evening. A few years ago, I was on my way back from a work conference when I began to feel really tired. I know myself well enough to recognize that I needed a break and to try and catch a few Z's before I fell asleep at the wheel. So I pulled over the road into a lay-by and just closed my eyes. I must have needed it, as the next thing I know, I jolted awake and checked my phone. I'd been out for nearly 3 hours, and now the sun was beginning to rise. Now it was brighter, and I could see that I had parked very close to some water. A lake or a reservoir, maybe. I decided to get out of the car, just for a minute or two, for a quick stretch, as my legs were all pins and needles, and I had a crick in my neck from not sleeping properly. As I got out, I noticed the car had some footprints. It wasn't hard to notice as the paint job is white, and the prints were muddy. But there was something unusual about them. They were spaced out, as if whatever had taken a walk straight over my car had been on 2 legs, and even more bizarre, had webbed feet. For a moment, I thought about maybe a goose, as they have 2 legs and webbed feet. But on closer inspection, although I am no expert on the size of bird feet, these prints looked much bigger, as if a man-sized web-foot creature had used my car as a bridge. The footprints were also pointed towards the water, so whatever had gone over the car had more or less plunged straight in. I could then also see that there was a large puddle on the roadside where the footprints began. I stared out into the water for ages, trying to make sense of it. But no matter what, I just couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation as to why I had a man-sized lizard footprint on my car that just disappeared into the water. So, I listened to YouTube channels for a while, and I found yours. And you seem to know a lot of stuff about this particular subject. Would you mind sharing some helpful advice? Dogs can be a blessing and a curse. They are great when they come and lovingly wag their tail, and they are fun when you needed an excuse to get off your butt and go for a walk. They are not so great when they need to go out at 10 p.m., when it is cold, dark, and pouring rain. Especially when they need to go, and they've been trained not to poop in the yard. So that was why on a cold, wet, dark night, I found myself in the woods behind the house, cursing my dog who seemed to be constipated by the amount of time he was taking to find a decent spot. I stood there, stomping my feet and blowing on my hands trying to keep warm, trying not to notice the rain trickling down on the back of my jacket, when I heard some rustling in the trees, not on the side where the dog was though. After all, we were the ones trespassing at the time, which is why I wasn't worried. The nocturnal creatures were ready to come out and play, and the last thing they needed was to see a human and a huge dog that wouldn't make up its mind where to squat. There was a sort of wet hissing noise. I know that sounds like an odd way to describe it, but that was what it was. A bit like when you go swimming and swallow too much water. More rustling and shaking of leaves, and I shouted at the dog to hurry up, or I was leaving him there all night on his own. Not that he understood or cared, but it's what we do. More rustling, and for the first time, I noticed that the rustling wasn't coming from the ground by around. It was the same height as around me in the trees. I thought it was odd, sure. It could have been a squirrel, but wouldn't they have been much higher up? And then it stepped out. The first thing I thought was that it must be some kind of kid dressed up. It was too late to be alone in the woods, and Halloween wasn't for ages away. But as I was just good staring at it, I began to think that if it was costume or makeup, it was Hollywood-level special effects. From its feet to its head, it was covered in what looked to me, because of the poor lighting, brown, scaly skin. It was just a bit taller than me, and skinny as a rake, with long dangly arms and long legs like a supermodel would have. I didn't know if it was male or female. The torso was just flat, and I couldn't see any parts to give it a sex. Then was the head. It was flat and long, not round or oval like a person, but squat like an actual snake, with eyes on either side, and huge lidless eyes. The dog noticed too, letting out a noise, followed by a whimper, while running over to me. That was enough to frighten off this snake, and it kind of slithered off. I don't know how it could have slithered. It had long legs, but that's what the movement reminded me of. The dog began barking frantically, and tried to chase this thing. I was able to grab him and pull him back to the house. He was at my heels when we got inside. He whined and begged, and acted crazy for a while. Now I can't drag him into those woods when it's dark. I can't have imagined it. If the dog saw it too, that must mean we really did see something out there that we can't explain. I'm pretty confident what lurks beneath, that I am not hallucinating. What are your thoughts on my encounter?